Hey guys, I'm Jay Beershank. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. We're here for another edition of book reviews. Today we got a really good one. This is the first book I've actually ever read twice in my life. I read this book 6 years ago. I got a list of books and music from a mentor of mine who I met when I went to rehab as a 15-year-old for smoking ganja at school. He gave me a list of books, and this book really popped out to me for the cliche title, which you will see. But before I tell you the title, I want you to know that if you do not read the book because it sounds a little bit cliche to you, you'll be disappointed later when you realize that things like that are complete fallacies, and you'll wish you would have read it when you first heard about it. And that book is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. This book is simply beautiful. I read it when I was 15, like I said, and it was the first book I ever read that was on my own accord. I read the book because I wanted to. I didn't have to read it because of school, I didn't have to read it because of anything else, only because I felt drawn to it. As the existential, psychedelic young 15-year-old I was, Man's Search for Meaning sounded right up my alley. Anyway, I was very disillusioned when I read it because it's not some lofty spiritual book at all. It is a book about a man who spends a few years in a concentration camp in World War II and how he was able to derive meaning from that when he was there. Not just meaning to the experience, but meaning to his whole entire life. He was a clinical psychologist, I believe, before he went in, so he did already have a pre-existing interest in people's way of finding meaning. I believe he had a manuscript that he actually lost the day he got put into the camp, and the manuscript was actually, I believe, an outline for his first book that was portraying this idea that he later put into Man's Search for Meaning. But what is most beautiful is that he actually got to live his exact philosophy that he was going to publish the book about. So then imagine writing a book about something and you're going to publish it, and then the day before you publish it, you get put into a tragic situation where you can actually walk the walk, and then having the opportunity to rewrite the book after that. You can imagine that probably the book was a million times more clear and practical after actually living it. So, how Viktor Frankl basically explains Man's Search for Meaning is Man's Search for Meaning is a never-ending choice of how do I want to respond to what is happening to me right now, and how do I want to look back upon what is happening to me right now. So let's kind of take the idea of response mechanisms. We have a lot of response mechanisms that get programmed into us through parenting, culture, friendships, whatever, anything that you may experience in your life. Let's take a very simple one. A lot of people have a physical response to being shoved. Let's say that I shove you, and then you immediately think, oh, screw you, and you shove me back, and then we engage in a fight because we're both reacting to each other on this kind of like automated response of fight, fight, fight. So that right there is a great opportunity to derive meaning from one's life. Let's say you push me, and then we pause reality and we think about what is going through my head. I can either snap and go into my automated response mechanism, or I can take a second and I can reflect upon how I'm feeling and reflect upon the situation and decide if pushing back is really what is going to give the overall most meaning to this situation. And usually that's not. Because usually doing what you're pre-programmed to do actually just kind of gives you a feeling of being one of the millions and doesn't really give you any kind of personalized choice or option or purpose or responsibility or meaning to your life. And the way that Viktor Frankl validates this point is by showing us how in the concentration camp he was able to realize that, okay, I don't have to respond the way that they want me to respond, which is to suffer, to be sad, to, you know, basically just give up on life and just work away like a dog and give up my humanity. That was a big point, is giving up your humanity, which is what you do when you kind of live through this automated response mechanisms that have been programmed into us through whatever. And the first step is being aware of that choice, and then the second step is actually making the choice to choose your humanity over the response mechanism. Now you might be saying, Jay, well, humanity is different for everyone else. And that's a very interesting topic that we could talk about for millions of years, and we probably have. Is there a meta morality? Is there a meta right? Well, I think that there is. I think that humans naturally know what's right and wrong, and I think what's right and wrong is very simple, and it's nestled within this choice we can make. Like, for example, with the push-push, which is right, which is wrong. Well, we could tackle that for years. We're not going to here. But it's a really beautiful, foundational, empowering truth, I think, that you do not have to respond to external situations as culture might program or tell us we should. It's an internal choice that we can make of how we respond to the world and how we perceive what is going on and how we perceive how we should feel about things, you know? You can make that choice, and once you make that choice, that gives your life meaning, because then sticking to that is what gives a life meaning. Well, sticking to it, but also being able to adapt, to evolve with your belief and value systems. So I really just love that idea, because whenever you feel hopeless or in despair or lost, you can just sit down and you can reflect upon, okay, wait, what is going on in my life? Why am I responding in this way? What needs to change? Does the outside need to change, or does how I feel need to change? And when you think the outside needs to change, think about Viktor Frankl in the concentration camp. He didn't have a choice for the external world to change, but he changed his internal state, and with doing that, it gave his life meaning and helped him survive through this tragic situation. That's another part of this book. If you've never read about any kind of concentration camp or any kind of the atrocities that were going on there, 2 books I recommend that I've read. I haven't read any more than these 2, so the only 2 I can recommend. But this one and A Day in the Life of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. That was not necessarily World War II concentration camp, but it's just another work camp kind of book where you get to see what it was like in these kind of atrocious conditions where people can subjugate others and create like a superior and subhuman class system, and just kind of how these people are put into the most dire situations and how they revert back to the most basic kind of mindsets and kind of most basic primal instincts. Yeah, and also there's a part in this book, the end part, the first 100 pages is his experience in the camp and how he's explaining this philosophy of finding meaning through choice and finding meaning through evolution of your internal state. And then the second half of the book is his therapeutic practice that he's developed called Logotherapy. Logotherapy is very interesting and practical. I really enjoy it. The part that stuck out to me the most as being the most practical is this idea of paradoxical intention, which is if you set an intention to do something in which you're anxious about not doing, then you can actually manifest the opposite outcome. Like for me in my life before, I've had a stuttering kind of anxiousness, like where I will be anxious about stuttering, and that will actually cause me to stutter more sometimes. But what the paradoxical intention would be is when I'm feeling nervous about stuttering, to actually shift in my mind and say, okay, I'm going to stutter as much as I can and show these people how well I can stutter. And what that will do is actually create the opposite, because you can't actually force yourself into doing something like that, at least when you use the paradoxical intention method for things you're scared about doing or things that you worry about, or you know, you could use it if you're having a hard time falling asleep or blah blah blah. And there's also the idea that when you try not to do something, then what ends up being the outcome is it's more likely that it happens. Like let's take like sexual performance. A lot of people in sexual performance, they say, I'm not going to climax, like usually the man. I'm not going to climax, I'm not going to climax, and what ends up being the outcome is he climaxes quicker. So that's a really interesting psychological and spiritual thing to think about, because like, you know, what you resist persists. So that's an interesting idea. Logotherapy also helps people derive meaning from their past if they feel like their suffering was, you know, unnecessary and they have there was nothing to be learned and there was nothing good about their suffering and it didn't have any meaning, then logotherapy can help them go back and think about that. Like, let's say your child dies and you have this is an example from the book. Like, there was a woman who had 2 children. One child died and another lived, and she was so sad about her child dying. But actually what logotherapy and what Victor tried to help the woman do was realize that now she was living with the fact that she still had one child, and she could love and nurture this child. So basically, don't, you know, dwell on the fact that you have a dead child, dwell on the fact that you have a living child. And there's just, you know, it's always like these kind of choices, these kind of like internal shifts we can make that just radically change our life. So yeah, guys, I think that Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning book is just such a foundational paradigm shift that once you kind of read about and maybe understand a little bit better, will just change the rest of your life, because you always then understand that you have this choice, and this beautiful, wonderful choice to find meaning from what's going on in your life. So that's this book review. Thanks for watching, guys. Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. Amazing book. Logotherapy, you can look that up online and read about that. Thank you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Take it easy. From Chiang Mai, Thailand here. We're out in the forest. It's beautiful. Peace.